Hey, on this episode of the Ethics Experts, we talked to Elizabeth Wilks-Wood. She is a compliance professional who does a great job of marrying regulations with actual influence of behavior inside the organization. I think you're going to find her approach extremely fascinating, very refreshing, and she has a lot of great tactics and tips that you can start implementing immediately in your program to start bending the curve and influencing your workforce more. That's the game that we're in right now. It's trying to broaden our impact by being actually impactful, by being actually influential, and helping to actually influence the behavior that occurs when we're not in the room. Remember, we can't be responsible for compliance. We can only be responsible for creating the circumstances for compliant behavior. So, hope you learn a lot in this episode. Hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
So I've been excited to get you on the Ethics Experts. So welcome.
Thank you.
So I always like to start with kind of your story. What kind of a kid were you? And then we'll kind of talk about how you got into the space, what got you interested in the space that we're in.
Of course. Gosh, what kind of kid? So I'm the youngest of four. I'm the first of my siblings to go to university, first of my family to go to university. I decided that I wanted to be a barrister, not a solicitor, but the barrister, the one with the wig and the gown, because they had the outfit. And I remember as a small child, I watched, there was a fictional drama, and there was an episode every day. And on Friday, there was the culmination of the mock trial. And there was a particular episode when I was a little kid, I was about 9. And there was a black lady and she had the wig and the gown. She seemed to be shouting, but people listened, captivated. And so I said to my mom, I'd like to be one of those. I didn't even know what a barrister was, but I wanted to be that thing that I'd seen on telly. So I decided I wanted to be a lawyer at a very, very young age. And so, yes, as I grew up, I thought, actually rather than just being fictional, it actually sounds really cool. So I went to uni, stood out quite a lot at bar school. English, for those that are English, being a barrister it's a slightly rarefied air, and it was the first time that I met really posh people because I'm not very posh, and so that was an enlightening experience when you're having dinner next to people whose parents hunt and shoot and fish and own stately homes, and you're just like, that is not my life. But that was good. I started my legal career as a regulator, so that was really fun. And even though I was relatively young, I had a stint over in Brussels at the European Commission, and I was advising companies about a new telecoms regulation. And it was really funny because I was advising these kind of industry grandees, and theoretically me, the young scamp, was the expert in the room telling them. I was just like, this is cool. So I decided that it was actually really nice to be able to apply the law within a company rather than being a civil servant. So I moved in-house. I've advised big companies and little companies, both nationally and internationally. And I fell into compliance completely by mistake. My background is I'm a competition and regulatory lawyer in the telecom space. And I can almost tell you the day that I fell into compliance, which was, I was in the room with the general counsel chatting, and we received a call from our head of legal in a French subsidiary who asked about whether or not we knew any competition law firms in Paris. And we were like, but you're in Paris. And he was like, well, I've been calling round, but they're all conflicted. And we were just like, is there something that you would like to tell us? Now you come to think of it, yes, we have been receiving quite a lot of correspondence from the regulator. And we thought that we might get some legal advice. So then when we got it, we realized that essentially there had been a cartel investigation. Clearly everybody else had gone for leniency, and they were simply calculating the quantum of the fine. They hadn't thought to tell the group. They hadn't thought to get external advice. We were just like, Houston, this is not a good position to be in. The general counsel looked at me and went, compliance, you do it. And I was just like, I don't know anything about compliance apart from the fact that the e-learning takes too long. The policies are really complicated, and I never quite understand what they're all talking about. And he went, then fix it. So I fell into compliance completely by mistake, as somebody that just thought it was all very, very, very complicated. And so, yes, I've been in compliance, for quite a while. Again, I've been in multinationals, both in the UK and abroad, and I love it. probably because it's a combination of lots of things, which is psychology of people, doing the right thing, navigating complex rules, systems and processes. I like building broken things, and therefore I love it. The more broken a program, the more interested I am, because I'm just like, let me get into the guts and fix it.
So when they said, hey, figure this out, what was kind of going through your head? I mean, because you have been in many situations, it sounds like, where you've had to kind of figure it out as you go. You're in this room, I'm just kind of picturing you in your 20s in this room being the expert. Let's actually go back to that, to that moment. Like, what did you learn in that moment that you can just kind of say, if people think you're the expert, you can just kind of say whatever? Like, what was that moment like?
Oh my gosh, so often you're theoretically the expert in the room, but you're sitting there in the pit of your stomach going, I absolutely don't know what I'm talking about. I absolutely am not the expert in the room. However, I think that I could find this out, and I'm sure that I could do it. So what I tend to find in these pivotal points in my career is there's either a comfort space where you just kind of go, I can't do it, don't know how to do it, can't do it, find somebody else. Or you go, the fact that it's making my tummy feel a bit funny and I'm really scared probably means that that's the direction in which I should jump. So I think one of the things that I've always known that I'm very good at is I can work really, really hard. And I love doing research. And so as soon as I knew that it wasn't an area that I was comfortable in, I thought, do you know what? The first website I'm going to go to is the French Competition Authority. I wonder if they've published any guidance about what a good compliance program looked like. And thank you, French authority, they absolutely have. And so I negotiated with the General Counsel a set of undertakings. Within my back pocket was this became my Bible, which is, if that's what you want us to do, we will do everything and more. Because in the French regime, the first few people that go for leniency might get it. But if after about the sort of first 2 or 3 operators, they're not interested in anybody else. And this was a sector-wide cartel. So by the time we had engaged the regulator, because we then clued in that we were being investigated, all the leniency had gone. But in the French regime, if you implement a good compliance regime, you can also get a reduction in fine. So then I was like, so let's go for the biggest reduction in fine, because we will make a program that is significantly better than we have. So that became my new objective.
So what is the rationale for those first couple of people getting leniency, while the next sort of group, where leniency is contingent on doing something different? Like, what is that?
So in the under the European sort of competition law regime, if you're a sort of a participant in illegal conduct, but you proactively go to the regulator and you give them information that they've not seen before, but what happens is, especially if it's a significant cartel, you might go to them with information, but they've generally got it because somebody else that threw everybody else under the bus has already disclosed all of that.
Yeah,
and
it's not new info for them. Yeah,
exactly. We know. Just like, but the worst of it is, of course, especially if you have experience of a cartel, defending a company that's in a cartel, you can't be the main ringleader and apply for leniency, because otherwise then theoretically crime could pay, because you could just absolutely facilitate a cartel and then throw everybody under the bus when you've made your money. So you even though you're proactively disclosing as much as you can to the regulator, you put a bit of a spin on it, and you need to make sure that you're not looking like the ringleader. So what ends up happening is the little guy ends up being implicated by everybody, because they said, we just went along with that guy.
Yeah, that's the ringleader, that little fella.
And the little guy's just like, who, me? And so even though you were an absolute idiot, and this situation was one where it was the quintessential competition law thing, which is conversation got hairy with competitors. Our little guy truly did sit there, was just interested and just listened, didn't really participate, was just like, oh, this is interesting. So it is a reason why you have this. You leave the meeting, you have it minuted that you leave, you then call your competition lawyer so that they say, my guy left the meeting. So it was the quintessential case study of an absolute idiot sales guy that sat in a room when the conversation got tricky, didn't leave, sat there, and then was implicated as part of a cartel participant. And that was the one that we then realized that, yes, we were going to get no leniency because everyone had thrown us under the bus. We had
Gotcha. So, I
No
mean,
idea.
what constitutes a cartel in the French regime or in the European context? Because the cartels I think about are all South American and they sell fentanyl and cocaine.
Yeah, it's not quite so exciting. So this was in the logistics sector, and essentially it was it's so terrible. Again, any European competition lawyer will just get sort of chills as soon as I'll say it. Invariably, it's within the context of a trade association. So you have competitors in a room, and often trade associations have legitimate reasons. So they're kind of discussing, I don't know, a common issue within the industry. However, once you get competitors in the room, it's very easy. Instead of having a quite benign anodyne conversation about objective stuff, is like, what are you doing on that product? Why don't you take those customers and I'll take these ones? And that's exactly what happened. So a very legitimate conversation became a very problematic conversation. And unfortunately, they meet time and time again, started sharing commercially sensitive information and realized it was easier to collude than compete. It was the quintessential. It's what you train all of your salespeople never to do that attend a trade association. That was what we did.
And like the rationale is that if there's sort of anti-competitive forces, then the market's not really working. Exactly. This kind of conglomerate or this cartel can essentially operate as a monopoly, which is bad for consumers. That's kind of the rationale
100%.
behind breaking those up.
And instead of competing on price and competing on innovation and fighting hard for every customer, it's just easier to collude and sort of segment the market. And you kind of actually, it means that you can artificially keep your prices higher, because now Nick and I are not competing. Nick has 50% of the market. He leaves me alone. I have 50%. He leaves my customers alone. And we all just can keep our prices high. Customers have no choice of anywhere else to go. We end up making more margin than we really should, and competition authorities get really very squirmy. And the thing is, I used to be a competition authority regulator, and so it was just like, this is so annoying because it's so stupid, and it's exactly what we tell you not to do. But
so if that if that stupid salesperson or that idiot, was he just not trained? Do you think he just didn't recognize that he was in hot water and he was just kind of curious, or what? Because it didn't sound like he was really kind of pulling strings and like wheeling and dealing.
No, although according to the other participants in the cartel, he was sort of one step down from Al Capone. However, I think there's it's just like, he's a criminal mastermind, you say.
Yeah, he's the kingpin.
He's a mid-level sales guy who was just an idiot. So I think it was a combination of two things. And it's also partly why the compliance is so interesting. Is it's really easy to have a very good paper compliance program where you have all the policies and procedures, and often head office just kind of says here and translates things and just kind of says, do the training, we translated it. Take our policies, we translated it. And generally the subsidiaries go, none of this makes sense in our world. And the head office goes, be quiet, do as you're told. And so they just go, okay. And so they are not doing what it says in the policies and the procedures, and they ignore the training, but they get head office leaves them alone because they just nod and go, yes, of course we're doing it. So there was a bit of that, which is a program that had never really been embedded outside of the head office. And the second one is, I think it's not understanding the realities of being a salesperson. So as a competition or as a compliance person, if you put that scenario, you absolutely go, hang on, if you're in a room with competitors and the conversation starts getting a bit hairy, even if you didn't quite know anything about the law, you'd probably go, I'm not sure that we're supposed to be doing this. However, if you're a salesperson and perhaps your boss is like, make the numbers, get it done, figure out what the competitors are doing, because maybe that gives us a competitive edge, you absolutely understand that even if you had been completely well-trained, which this guy wasn't, but even if he had been well-trained, there's a real tension there, because you go, I know the training maybe says I should get out, but actually this would probably be good for my company. Not me personally, but actually maybe it does enable us to get a competitive edge. So it's at top of mind because I was doing some training on this earlier this week. There is inherently a tension sometimes between what we as compliance people say to the business and the realities of the roles that people are in, which is often their managers are just like, get it done.
Well, there's these conflicting, like, layered incentives in place, right?
100%.
And something like this is a little bit more in the gray, right? Like if I see somebody, reaching into the till and putting cash in their wallet, in their pocket, you get that like feeling in your gut. That's very clearly wrong, right?
Yes.
Something like this, where there's this sort of competing incentives where you're like, I don't really know if this is hairy. Is this water really getting hot? I have a loyalty to my boss, or I have a loyalty to my own checkbooks. I got to get the numbers, or I have a loyalty to the company and I want us to win. That's a lot harder to sort through, which again, to your point, is why it's so important to not only for compliance folks to understand what the realities are on the front line, but also to like truly embed that program.
100%. And I think one of the other things is it's super important that the saying that this is the way that we do business or this is the way that we don't do business cannot simply just come from legal and compliance folk, because you can imagine the more removed that you are from that function, that the easier it is. Like, you don't understand my life. You don't know that my boss is on my back. But rather, that importance of how we do business around here has to come through the commercial line, because it should be their managers that are saying, we don't do this, as opposed to the lawyer often in head office going, we don't do this, and people going, whatever, and you are. So it has to truly be tone from the top. And so often tone from the top is lots of lawyers going, don't do this, and sales are like, you're fine with that
you
job.
Don't have a quota.
Exactly. My boss says I don't have to listen to you. My boss says make my numbers, and you're just like, yeah.
So back to that thing with the French regime. Yes. You know, there's kind of this mess, and you're not able to get sort of the sort of like off the top leniency. You have to show that, hey, we're going to be doing something that's significant. You got this guidance from your deep research on what a good compliance program was. Do you think that at that time or at all, the French regime was really looking for just something in place, or were they really looking for a truly effective program?
It was the latter. We were able to secure the highest reduction in fine under this sort of improved compliance regime. And I think it was because in part we were really honest. It's either my superpower or my greatest weakness is I'm really, really honest, sometimes to a fault.
It's always both, though, right? Your greatest strength is always your greatest strength.
I know. It's like, should I or should I not have a cape? I'll just have a cape because I'd like a cape. I can imagine that lots of other people were going, our compliance programs were exemplary. We simply do not understand how this happened. It was simply one bad apple.
Right.
I was in there going,
which I'm sure they've never heard before, right?
I know, they were just like, you don't say. I was the opposite. I was just like, look, I've experienced our program and I found it difficult to understand. And the training was really difficult and our policies were very long and very complicated. And I can imagine that as a sales guy, maybe he wasn't clear. But we are committed to making this better. And so I think if nothing else, they appreciated our honesty. Also, at one point, I think the general counsel and I made them laugh because we were a little bit like market traders going, if we did this, would it help? What about this? What about this? And I think they were just like, no one else is coming in. But we were genuinely trying to do the best. And we were like, we're open. We'll give it a go. What do you think? We're willing to try. And I think it was that open and honesty and candor. I think it demonstrated to the regulator that we really meant it. Because as you say, you can imagine that you get the slick lawyers in and they just kind of go, my counsellor said that I should say X, Y, and they're just like, yeah. Whereas we were just like, no, genuinely, we want to make it better. What would you suggest? We think this. What do you think? And it worked really, really well.
So, I mean, I've had conversations like this a couple of times, or kind of around this topic that I'm about to say. It seems like a lot of folks, well, I mean, you kind of gave the example. It seems like a lot of folks sort of go into these conversations with regulators and they're like, how do I deal with a regulator? And you have to do this posturing and I have to have this script and I have to not show any weakness, right? But I think a lot of people forget that the regulators are just human beings and they don't know the details. They don't know what's kind of behind the scenes. They don't, they're getting data from the people, the representatives from the company, you in this case, about what the state of affairs are and so forth. And it's puzzling to me how we treat, I think this happens like in work as well. Like the way we deal with our neighbors and our friends sometimes is different than the way we deal with our coworkers or our bosses. And when we're talking to a regulator, we're just talking to another human being. And so in my mind, of course, they're trying to understand like how committed you are to it. You said a lot of words like we were very candid, we were very transparent, we were very like genuine in our horse trading, so to speak, to figure out like what is going to really resonate with them. That's a very collaborative kind of vibe. That's where there's not a lot of pretense, where there's not these sort of like curtains up or these walls up that are kind of trying to, you weren't trying to hold your cards close to the vest. You were laying all the cards out on the table. And in my mind, if I was a fly on the wall, I would say, well, yeah, of course this conversation is going to go a lot better because we're just talking, person to person. What do you think prevents people from like engaging in that true kind of like humanistic way with a regulator who, like I say, regardless, they might have a different email address or like a different title, but like they're just a person trying to figure out a problem?
I think I probably have more. I used to be a regulator, so I can remember what it was like on the other side of the desk when, frankly, someone came in almost swinging just after hello, and you were just like, I'm sorry, what's this about? Because it may be often that you disagree with the regulator. It may be that you think that the regulatory regime is terrible, but you do have to respect that they're just trying to do the best that they can at their job in the same way that you are. And it's very easy when you really fundamentally disagree. Let's say if it's a regime that you just simply disagree with, it's really easy to come in with their energy. But what you forget is there's a guy on the other side of the desk who's accountable to his boss, who today really wanted to try and do a good job, and you're just making that really difficult. And it becomes really counterintuitive because, unfortunately, often when you are in situations where you're subject to regulatory scrutiny, your default position can be to become very, very aggressive. However, so much of the reality of being investigated is the being able to pick up the phone to the case handler and sort of say, I know that the deadline was 4:00, but somebody's on a conference call. If we do it in an hour, is that okay? You want to have that relationship. You can't have that when you go in swinging every day in the meeting and wanting to knock 7 bells out of them. So I think sometimes the posturing looks good. And I remember when I was in private practice, always looks good in front of a client if they kind of go, she really fought for me, even if you didn't get the outcome. But this is the difference about being an in-house lawyer. My job doesn't end when I leave the door. I just stop. I just move to the next set of client billing. These are my people. The salesperson, I could have punched him in the throat quite happily. But when you sit down and have a chat with him, you just kind of go, mate, you were 100% wrong. But I kind of hear you. And the thing is, you're just one guy. So which probably means there's more like you out in the organization. So I either pillory you and just like, you're an absolute numpty. How did you let this happen? Or alternatively, I do a bit of self-reflection, which is, how did this happen? And he's in front of me, but there's probably thousands like him who are not. How do I fix it? So for me, I always try to be a bit more collaborative and have a degree of empathy on the person on the other side of the desk, even if sometimes you really don't like them. But it's just like, what will serve me best in this circumstance? And it rarely is it knocking 7 bells out of the other side, especially if it's a regulator.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I don't know. Every nut can be cracked. You know what I mean? Every person can be persuaded. And you said something else interesting there. When you're coming to a regulator as a representative for the company, the person you're talking to is subject to all the same cognitive errors that are wired into every human being. Exactly. And so you really do have an opportunity to be you could be one of 1,000 or one of 10,000 people inside that organization, but their picture of the organization is going to be disproportionately influenced by the way you interact with them. And if you come and you're very cagey, well, then they're going to think that this is a cagey organization. If instead even if you're even if you're the unicorn in the company who's way more candid and way more honest than everybody else, they can't help but start to assume that this is the type of organization it is, I think.
Agreed. I think it's, you know yourself, especially as a compliance professional, you know how you show up very differently when somebody maybe has been forced to come in front of you because, I don't know, maybe their boss thinks they're a bit of a wrong 'un, and you have a chat with them and they're being dead shifty and dead cagey and you're asking them questions and they won't give you a straight answer. You know how you show up with that, which is like, yeah, go on. See if you can outsmart me. I've had years of this. Or somebody legitimately comes to you and just kind of goes, do you know what, Elizabeth, I think I may have messed up.
Yeah.
This is the circumstance. And the latter, you can still be super annoyed with them, but it lowers your defenses. And now it becomes how can we work together to make this better? As opposed to, I can see that there's another conversation that's going on and you think that you're kind of playing this 4D chess with me, because now it becomes, now we're just fighting. And it often, it was only because I was doing some training. So often the job of a lawyer and a compliance person is understand the conversation that's not being said. And you can often only get to that when you can lower your defenses enough for the other person to be open and honest to tell you what they really are thinking. Because so often there are really two conversations. There's the surface one, which is not the real one, or there's the real one, which is, I'm really scared, I messed up, but I don't want to say it because I think that I'm going to get sacked, or I'm going to get told off, or you're going to judge me, or you're going to think I'm stupid. And either we can have the surface level conversation, which is neither of us are really telling the truth, or alternatively, I can just kind of go, tell me. And now we can have the honest conversation. We can always do something about it. Even if it's terrible, we can always do something about it.
It's such a hard challenge because even if you work in an organization that, you know, has the word transparency on the wall, for example, it's not like when somebody steps into the four walls of that organization, they just magically become candid and open. You know, people come with their own baggage. They have their own life experiences. They have their own, you know, jadedness from other organizations where they spoke up and they got blasted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how do you balance that from how do you balance that, you know, both from like a tone from the top or like corporate perspective on down to like the individual interaction perspective, where you can help them kind of like take off the jacket, so to speak, or put the guard down so you can get down to that real conversation and you're not having that fake sort of surface level second conversation that you were talking about?
I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm the master, but I think what I'm very good at is I'm very empathetic. And I think it goes to your earlier point, which is it's that understanding of what are the incentives that have led you in front of me right now. Mm-hmm. Now, but again, you'll know that there are circumstances where there's nothing worse than when you know that you've messed up and someone's going to call you on it. Now, it works better when they can do it with a little bit of grace and they can allow you to save some face. There's terrible when somebody just like blasts you with both bullets, because the only thing that will happen is that you become very defensive and now I'm justifying it even though it's unjustifiable. So I think for me, it's just about thinking, trying to put myself in their shoes. And even if I absolutely disagree with them, can I see, even if it's a sliver of agreement, which is I can understand what's led you to here. And especially from a compliance perspective, the line that I often use is better you tell me than we're in front of a regulator and you tell them. So be honest with me, and you'll know yourself, if there is any investigation, the worst or the thing that regulators loathe is where you're either dishonest or you're holding things back, or you're being a bit cute, which is giving them 10% when you're holding back 90%. And that you need that from a compliance perspective, because if we are sitting on top of a pile of steaming poo because something's gone horribly wrong, better that we know it, because then we can clean it up. The worst is that I think it's a little minor incident and we deal with that and then pat ourselves on the back and go, it's done. And then 6 months later, we now realize that we never really understood the full extent of it and that now it's really bad. And so I can only fix something at this systemic level if I really understand it. And you can only accept that people are going to come to you and have to admit that they may be messed up if you have your defenses down and they feel that that's a safe space for them to do so, even if they know that there will be consequences at the back end of it.
I've seen this thing where, everyone thinks that like you can't mess up and that things can't go wrong. But in my experience, it's like everything's always messing up. Everything's always going wrong. Absolutely. How do you attack that kind of sentiment? Because I think that, everybody is sort of wired for this self-preservation, right? And, everyone is definitely self-focused more than anything else. They want to, they have a mortgage or they have to maintain their pocketbook and all that kind of stuff. How do we kind of address that thing, or how do we help shift that mindset to say, listen, things are going to go wrong not that it's fine that things go wrong, because we need to have an eye for quality and all that kind of stuff. But you know what I'm saying? Like people seem to go through life, particularly in like their professional lives, assuming that, it's like brain surgery where don't sneeze, you know what I'm saying? Like don't mess up at all, because, the patient's going to die, when in actuality, I don't know. I mean, in school, you got to get, 95% to get an A. In business, it seems like an A is like kind of 80%. You know what I'm saying? That's not nearly as accurate. There's a lot more sort of errors in whatever an A is in business. So like, how do we help make that connection for people? Because I think if people truly believe that, then the odds of them coming when something messes up is a lot higher. Like, how do we address that desire that people have for security?
I think the only way that I know to do it is there's an approachability that you need to project out there to your company. And it's from the way that you show up as a leader. So often when you're talking about compliance, it's very easy. And also, I think sometimes people underestimate how scary it is to deal with lawyers or people of our profession if it's not your world. And often our job titles carry a lot of weight. And if you're a junior person and somebody says, you got to go and see the head of compliance, it's like going to the gallows. Now, for us, we go, I'm a lovely person, I'm dead nice. Yeah. If you're super junior, it's just like, I am absolutely terrified that I've done something wrong. So I think to understand that you come with your title, your seniority, our function comes with certain preconceptions of people that live outside of it. And it is quite scary to be in front of us. So if anything, we need to project more openness and more approachability, because otherwise it can be very, very intimidating. I remember when I was a young lawyer, and the funny thing is when you get more and more senior, when you're a young scamp, especially a young scamp lawyer, you often attend these meetings with like big bosses, and you sit there and you're like, wow, one day I'm going to be as smart as they are. And you sit there slightly confused about what's going on and praying that no one picks on you, and just going to go, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just going to keep my head down. They are like gods to me. These people know everything. They're omnipotent. And you get up the organization, you go, some of these people are clowns and they have no idea. They're just really good at saying the right thing. And, they're
just good at chewing on their glasses and looking,
Exactly. And you're just like, it's funny because you actually laugh, because you just got to go, when I was a youngster, I would have thought that you were super smart, but now not so much. But
isn't that crazy? It's crazy.
But I remember it so vividly when I would sit often as a young lawyer in these meetings with like these really big people, and you're just like, I don't even understand the world that you live in. And then you meet them normally and you're just like, solid 5 out of 10. Solid 5 out of 10 in terms of
solidly average. Yeah.
And nice 5.
In my first job, it was a financial services company, and there was this guy that I was like, my gosh, this guy, he's, like you said, he's a god among men. And he just, within the office, he seemed like so, like, man, he's the guy. He's so smart, walking with purpose and all this. And we went to a client, the first time I was on a deal, one of his deals, I was like, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to learn so much with this guy. And I did learn a lot from him. He was very smart. But the guy I saw in front of the client was like a little boy. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, I had this guy pegged so wrong. And it was such an eye-opening thing for me, where I was just like, wow, if he feels that way, that's the way I feel, kind of, it's my first job, that was a real eye opener for me, to kind of take these guys down from Mount Olympus a little bit and realize that the only difference between human beings is just, we're just born at different times. That's it. It's not like you get to some age and you just are infallible, or you get to some age and you're just like, the epitome of wisdom. Everybody has these insecurities, and like, no one is perfect. You know what I mean? It ended up giving me a lot of confidence, because like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. I can do that.
It's all right. And he seems to be fine. So what am I worried about?
What am I worried about?
100%. So I think in terms of, And it's really easy for me to remember what that feels like. I remember being in front of senior people one-to-one and being terrified. And I was at one of the companies, and I was in the lift with the CEO and the chief of staff and a very junior person. And the CEO, she was just thinking about something else at the time. And I think she was probably preparing for a meeting or something like that. And the little junior person clearly knew that she was CEO and kind of went, "Good morning." And she didn't respond just because she was super duper busy and thinking about the next meeting.
Yeah.
And then the junior person just sort of got off, probably really, really upset.
Shoulders hunched.
I know. I was like, this is the worst day in the world. And I knew the CEO and I knew the chief of staff. And the chief of staff sort of turned to her and just kind of said, "You do realize he probably thinks he's about to be sacked." And she was just like, "Sorry, what? I was just doing
She was in her
something."
own head. She was in her own world or something. Yeah.
But the problem is, it's just like, but we're not having the same conversation. And to him, it wasn't that you were in your own head, but it was that you deliberately chose to ignore him because maybe he was junior or whatever. And it's so easy,
Right.
as you say, each of us are in our own head. Each of us have this view of the world. And I think it's relatively easy, especially as a Black woman, where I'm often in spaces where, look, I stand out and not always in a good way. It's really easy for me to put myself in the head of the outsider and in the head of the person that just did the dumb thing because they thought it was right, but now with hindsight, it was really stupid. So I'm like, we all make mistakes. And I think as a leader, it's about that vulnerability and the willingness to kind of go, I mess up all the time. I mess up all the time. Often the best things come out of the mess up, by the way, because you can only get to the good stuff after the mess up. Because when you messed up, then you just kind of go, I attacked that 100% wrong. But you know what? Now I know how to do it. And then it's a win. So sometimes the mess up is the nugget. And so being open and vulnerable enough to share that and encouraging my team to do the same. So we try to put out that energy, which is, we're really nice. It's okay. We won't get mad.
We'll figure it out.
We might be disappointed, but we won't get mad at you. And I try to do it as an example, which is, and I've said it a few times, well, I encourage my people just to innovate and try things. If it worked out well, we called it strategy. If it didn't work out, we call it a pilot, and we can just drop it and just do something else. So everything is a win in its own way.
Yeah. You can kind of win or learn instead of win or lose,
100%. And I think if you show up with that mindset, I think it's a bit infectious and people kind of pick up on it, which is, yeah. And also remember the amount of times that you've done something stupid and countless times that I've done something stupid and said the wrong thing and congratulated some lady on her pregnancy when she was just had a big lunch and stuff like that. And then you hold your head down and go, please never let me see her again. But then the world keeps turning and it's fine the next day. So even how terrible it feels on the day, it's rarely as bad as you think.
Yeah, that's kind of that spotlight effect where, if I have something in my teeth at a dinner party and I find out later, I'm just driving home thinking, I bet everyone saw that and everyone's talking about, oh my gosh, did you see him? He had stuff in his teeth all night. You know what I mean? But nobody's thinking about that. Everyone's just kind of focused on themselves and they're thinking about the stupid thing that they said that they think everybody else is thinking about. You know what I mean?
100%.
A lot of freedom in that, though. You know what I mean?
It's fabulous. And to be fair, sometimes you can, sometimes, and then this is the nice way, because I'm naturally introverted, so you can be very disarming about it, which is just call it out, for example. So I'm terrible with people's names, and I invariably just call lots and lots of people dear. And people go, she's so sweet. She's so sweet. As a woman, you can get away with it. As a guy, perhaps not so much.
No, and mine is buddy. Hey, buddy.
It works.
That works. He's like, oh, look, he's friends with everybody.
So affable and nice, and you're just like, because I literally don't know who you are. And sometimes I was literally introduced to someone like the day beforehand, and I've forgotten their name. And the worst is, then you get called on it, and then somebody just kind of goes, and this is, and you were just like,
take it easy. Yeah, this is dear. I thought that's dear.
This is my friend who is, and so you just kind of go, do you know what? I have forgotten your name. I am so sorry. You've probably forgotten mine too. And invariably, people are just disarmed by it. So you can get away with quite a lot, I think, if you're a little bit sort of self-deprecating.
Yeah, and just honest and transparent. So I want to talk a little bit about the kind of behavioral side of this thing.
Sure.
You said at the start you love compliance because it's like figuring out a puzzle, and how do we move this from like a paper program that's just driven by head office down into the organization where it's actually affecting behavior. Talk to me a little bit about that. And I feel like that's such a massive gap in compliance programs in general. My sort of thesis is, well, I love this space because it's kind of a blend of all these really cool things. It's like you need to know the regulations, all that needs to be dialed in. The program has to work in practice, of course, but you have to also like influence people, and you have to influence people on the front lines. You have to influence managers to sing from the same song sheet and so forth. But there's this bias, it seems, to, and I don't know what it's driven by. It might be driven by the personality types that self-select into this space, where there's a certain security in the black and white words on a page that clearly a regulation is words. There's a box around that. Like we know what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. So there's a sort of black and white tangibility, whatever, to something like that. But to actually make it work, you have to kind of live in that gray and that more sort of amorphous thing that's harder to kind of wrap our hands around. If I press send on a policy, that goes out. Great, check mark, done. As opposed to like the harder thing, which is like, is this policy going to actually influence behavior? So you seem like somebody who is good at sort of straddling and sort of bringing that yin and yang together. But broadly, it seems like I feel like if I could wave a magic wand and like fix one thing in our broad industry, it would be that second thing, because that's the last mile in my mind. That's the game. Of course, you need to know those regulations, but the game is how do you influence? So I just want to spend a little bit of time about that, because I think you have some expertise in that. I'm sure you wouldn't say that because you're so humble. But you just the way that you talk, I can tell that you have maybe a sensitivity to that, or a penchant for that sort of second thing, that kind of influence thing.
Yeah. I think there's nothing quite so dangerous from a compliance perspective as somebody who kind of says, "We got this." Because I'm almost guaranteed to kind of go, loads of paperwork, right? Loads. SOPs, can't move from policies, loads of them. Training, impeccable. Go and find any sales guy and just ask him about any of this stuff, and he's just going to go, what? We've got a compliance team. Exactly. Yeah. There's a policy, you said? So I think, number one, I hate wasted effort. Number two, I think I've seen, especially because I think my entry to compliance was a paper program, and it's so easy to pull apart, because generally go outside of head office, speak to any normal person, and they will go, I have no idea who you are. I have no idea what any of this is, but my job is just to sell stuff. And if you think I would have time to read that 15-page policy, you don't understand.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You mean that e-learning thing that I just clicked through while I was reading the paper? Exactly. It's like I am patting myself because my program is good. So I think it's an understanding which is, for me, and I try to say it, which is the compliance program is what people do when my people are not in the room. If you're only doing the right thing because there's a piece of paper that says here that I should do it, we have already failed, because we know that I can never write a policy that can anticipate all of the shenanigans that people could do to circumvent it. And so you either live with that and go, it's not about the paper, is it? Or you go, I will just wordsmith this so that it comes up with the form of words, and I will give it and dispense it like the tablet, and they will ingest it and they will live by it. I'm just like, because also you remember you're a normal person when you're out and about in the world. And as a normal person, sometimes you know the rules. I don't know, don't park there, but you do. Somebody gives you a bit of extra change in the store and you keep quiet. To be fair, compliance people would never do that, but normal people would. You just understand in your real world, there's what the paper says and there's what you do, and they are two very different things. So from my perspective, it's how can I make you feel in your gut without needing to know about the paper. So one of the people that I give as an example, it was in the same company, and it was an individual who was very junior, and he did an amazing thing, which is, I think one of the customers tried to get him to do something naughty and he didn't do it. And essentially the customers are offering more and more money for this guy to do something naughty, and he didn't do it. Amazing. And I remember he was nominated by a colleague for just like, Elizabeth, you should go and speak to this guy. I spoke to him and I was just like, why didn't you do it? And he's like, you know what, Elizabeth, it just didn't feel right in my gut. And you were like, this is compliance. It's this. Yeah. It's not about the paper. It's not about the e-learning. It's not about the SOP. It's that feeling in your gut that makes you a bit squirmy, that just like, it just didn't feel right to do it. And for me, if I can get people to get that feeling, that's compliance. It doesn't live in the SOPs, doesn't live in the training. It lives in the way that people around you just kind of, it's a bit like a social norm. It's like, yeah, it's just not how we do things, or worse, it is how we do things here. And there's just a permission structure that would allow me to do it, because ultimately, unfortunately, I've been in some organizations, which is you just do whatever you can get along with, as long as you make the numbers, no one cares. And I've been in other organizations, which is we just don't do that, not that way, not in this company. And it's how do you switch on the latter? And it's around, I think, holding people to a very high standard, not treating them like children, and not hiding behind the paperwork, because the paperwork will give you a very false sense of comfort. Super dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. And do you think it might be rooted down in in terms of those who get that sense of security from the paperwork? Is it rooted down in, you think, maybe the misconception that they think that they're responsible for compliance, as opposed to they're responsible for creating the circumstances for compliant behavior that they can't control?
100%, 100%. I was speaking to some of our most senior managers, and one of the people who had interviewed me for the role said, I interviewed Elizabeth, and he said she was down to the second two, and there was a person ahead of her that I spoke to, and he was like, compliance, it's like we're in a car. And it's a dual control car, and my job is to push the brakes when you drive too fast. And he was like, okay. So then me, big head, I came and I was like, see, compliance is like a car. And he was just like, do all you compliance people have the same analogy? Yes, we do. So it's like a car. I'm in the back of the car. My job is to teach you how to drive the car safely, because if you don't, we're both going to crash. But I don't have the controls. It's about you. My job is to make sure that you do it right, but it's not, I can't take control of it. And I think, yes, it's very easy to somehow think we do it. We're doing it for you. And therefore, as long as the paper says do it, therefore, like an automaton, you take the paper, you read the paper, and then you chug out the behavior. But the reality is we're all humans. We have good days and bad days, good decisions and terrible decisions, good bosses and bad bosses, stretching targets. And the paper will not save you. The paper will not guide you. Your gut guides you. And it's about trying to anchor that and to make them feel that kind of that tension when there is something that's not in line with our values. And I don't care that you don't know the law. I want that. That's the feeling that I want in you, because that feeling, I could change the SOP and you'd still do it right. That feeling, I could not have a policy and you'd still do it right. This is compliance. That's what I try to do.
So let's go back to that first story you talked about. That salesperson didn't have that feeling sitting in the room, right? So I think that, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying here, but like, is that because that person just doesn't have a conscience? I doubt that. His conscience just has been seared. Probably not that. Is it a wiring? Some people are going to do the right thing regardless. And if you tell them what the right thing is, then they have that in their, their register in their mind. And they say, okay, well, that's sort of out of bounds and I don't want to do that. Yeah. I think that is, that's not in everybody. And so is it really a question of just kind of knowledge, like knowledge transfer? I mean, I think most people, obviously, the overwhelming number of people, I think, have a conscience, and not everybody's
Yes.
trying to like see what they can get away with. So is it really just
Absolutely.
a question of making people like understand what's in bounds or out of bounds, or what might be in and out of bounds, to where they can raise their hand? Because like you said, they don't have to know the law. Is that really what the game is?
I think for me, yes, that particular instance, that guy, I think, was a function of two things. Number one, a paper compliance program, and an assumption that head office could dispense and some translated terrible policies training, and somehow it was guiding the behavior of the people in the subsidiaries, which it was not. And secondly, misaligned incentives, which is not only is it that he probably clicked through his training, but also there was no tone from the top. There was no one that said that this is how we do business. And in fact, probably what he heard from his boss was, get it done, get it done. And therefore, when he was in an environment whereby, from his perspective, he was getting it done because he was hearing what the competitors were doing and probably going, we could do something around that. That's really good intelligence. At no point did he clue in and go, I'm not really sure that I'm supposed to be doing this. So I think very often it's a combination of the two. It's that old fraud triangle, isn't it? Often there's the opportunity and the rationalization, and misaligned incentives as well. So often misaligned incentives. That's also why you need the commercial line to be talking about this is the way that we do business. Because actually that tension, which is sometimes there is a misaligned incentive, you in particular need your commercial leaders to proactively flesh out those misaligned incentives, because otherwise they're driving the behavior in the organization. It's almost like there's a second language than what you're speaking that's actually permeating the organization, and you need to align the two. But you want the leaders to feel that tension. And in fact, you want them to communicate that tension and how to navigate that with their people, because their people are experiencing it as well, which is, I know maybe I'm not supposed to do it, but you do say that the numbers matter, and you want them to go, when there's a balance, this is what I want you to do. And that's that's tone from the top.
It's interesting how much we can borrow from other departments in the organization to like drive more compliant behavior. So, I think when compliance first came out, it was really all about, paper process, paper program, keep the boss out of jail. Let's kind of, check the box here.
Exactly.
I think now it's really a game, like you're saying, it's a game of influence, and we have to kind of drive behavior forward. So, there's been this democratization of marketing tools, right? Like you don't need a graphic designer anymore. You can go on Canva and you can make some graphics, right? And there's principles and axioms from marketing that we should be absorbing to say the same message 7 times, seven ways, and really sort of pierce that veil of attention. On the sales side, in the sales department, there is this is as old as, dirt. You can take somebody through a sales training, or you can give them a sales book, but it's almost like not until you do a role play where they're actually trying to put these things into practice does that new, thing that you're trying to teach actually soak into the brain and soak into the body and sort of change how they behave in those instances. And what I've seen is as leaders, middle managers can do it doesn't even have to be every week, but just from time to time, do a role play around a particular topic. It sends such a message. It sends like, hey, we actually care about this. This is not just like some words on the wall or some, something that, our organization is just checking the box with. My manager's talking about it, so it must be more important, right? That sort of tone from the top has the impact of the tone at the top really seems to have a disproportionate, or to be disproportionately impacted by like how close that voice is. You know what I'm saying? So something coming from my manager seems to like resonate more and seem more important than something that sort of comes out through the, corporate communique. And it allows for us to see, either watching the role play or being in the role play helps us to kind of trigger that gut feeling that we need people to have when they feel like they're getting too close to that electric fence, 100%.
100%. I think until you can bring it to life with the everyday, the difficult situation that you're faced at just when you're about to go home on a Friday night and you're not really giving it your full attention, but maybe 10%, it's making the right decision at those pivotal moments. And what you hope is that the first time that they've ever thought about that is not when they're in the midst of the crisis, but rather, Yeah, I remember that Nick and I had spoken about something like that, or I did hear that somebody else had the same issue.
Right.
Exactly. It's almost like a bit of a drill, but it is a muscle that you have to kind of keep working, because otherwise it does easily atrophy. But I think your point, which is the way that we do things around here has to be, it can't just be a legal and compliance voice, because it just lacks credibility. And it's very easy for leaders to go, oh, yeah, but, you know, I'm not a lawyer. They're there drawing down their fat salary. They don't know what it's like for us in the trenches. So it's essential that the way that we do things around here comes from finance, comes from sales, comes from procurement. So it's just like a kind of a thread that weaves into the DNA, as opposed to this jarring like record scratch of somebody going, and don't do that. And you go, huh? What was that? Me? I don't do that. It's very easy for our programs to lack credibility unless it's brought to life by the decisions that people make every day when we are not in the room. I hate it when people go, and for example, and especially as a competition lawyer, they kind of go, we want a competition lawyer in the room. They can do the naughty thing just outside. Oh, come on now. If they're only doing it because you're sitting there as a lawyer, then we have already failed. Trust me.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, if you're only not running at the pool because the lifeguard isn't there, then that ain't working.
I know. But for you, I would be feral. It's just like, I think we have bigger problems. And so it's about empowering the business to do the right thing when we're not there, which isn't comfortable. Because,
and it's also not easy, to your point.
The easiest thing is Nick's got my back. Nick will tell me whether or not it's okay. If I'm not sure, I ask Nick. Nick tells me. If it all goes terrible, I'll go that Nick told me. That was why. Exactly. But he said, and it's also why it's like, let's have a meeting, let's have a call, so that there's no accountability if it all goes really badly. But what you want is you want the person to go, do you know what? We all know what's okay. This is what we're going to do, and this is not what we're going to do. And it's not about compliance, which is hard for compliance because we like to think we're very important and very special. It's really not about us. It's about what they do when we're not there. And make it easy and make it simple. But often we make the easy way the hardest way, and then we get surprised when people won't do it. But it would be a bit like in a supermarket, you have the choice of these beautiful sweets, or you have the choice of this kind of ever so slightly dented can of carrots where the label's sort of falling off, and who knows whether it's in date. And we go, it's really good for you, eat it. And people go, ew, no way.
I can't even open that thing. Yeah.
I know. Is it even okay? Compliance is a choice. It's a decision. We help people to make the right choices, but it is always a choice. It's both the thing that makes this job so cool and the thing that can make it really hard. Is people make good and bad choices. Our job is to kind of move the deck more in the right way. But it absolutely is a choice. It's a choice. There is no SOP that I can write that the business will 100% follow. And when you just kind of go, I'm okay with that, now you can show up with a very different mindset.
Yeah, well, to your point, it kind of changes the game and it changes the tack we have to take in order to like reach the goal, you know? 100%. Man, I cannot believe that we're done already. This was really a lot of fun. I got to have you back and we got to do something again. But thank you so much for joining us today. This was really a lot of fun. And I hope you have a great holiday. I hope this was a good kind of, appetizer for the holiday.
Thank you. It was a delight. Thank you for asking me. It was such fun. You take care.
We'll see you soon.
See you. Bye.